proverbs like this whole silver lining one are often held up and given out by those positivity folks who love telling people to look for the positive and share gratitude and intention your way to happiness and all that stuff, right? All of that, quite lovely. Great. But I cannot get behind it if it invalidates the experience of the person in a narcissistic relationship. So let's add to that proverb series, because I think having those proverbs just end up becoming pithy ways of getting to the truth. Today's proverb: blood is thicker than water. You've all heard this one. Some of you may even believe it. Probably more than some of you believe this. The origins of this proverb go back to the 1100s. It was in German manuscripts, and the initial translation really spoke to family loyalty. That family commitments or relationships would have to take precedence over the bonds of romantic love or friendships. Now, I actually think this proverb, that blood is thicker than water, is sort of an enably proverb that is often used in narcissistic families. A sort of permanent get-out-of-jail-free card for family members to behave badly. But then, after somebody behaves badly in a family, they can fall back on this idea of family loyalty as a be-all, end-all. Now, if you come from a healthy, happy, close-knit family, then this proverb may feel intuitive. Yeah, we always stick together and we got each other's back. Good for you. But for those who originate from narcissistic or otherwise abusive family systems, it gets very complicated very quickly. In some ways, the greater the pathology and the dysfunction of a family of origin, the more pathologically bonded a person can feel to the family system at large. And they're often drawn back by emotions, including to finally wanting to work it through, to be seen in their family system, finally get it right, win over those toxic family members, show them what you've done in your life and are doing, as well as sometimes feeling guilt if you were to actually set healthy boundaries in those systems. Some people feel that they cannot escape narcissistic family systems either physically because of necessity or guilt, and the shame and the confusion that keeps them in psychologically, because even if you move to the other side of the world, your family may still be in your head. You still hear their voices, their gaslighting voices, their mocking voices in so much of what you do. That isn't really family loyalty. That's family stuckness. But blood, the statement, the proverb, blood is thicker than water, is often used as a way to minimize, for example, like, for example, if you were to go and seek out a more supportive group of friends or something, if you finally create some distance from a narcissistic family, and let's say you perhaps decide to take your vacation or holidays, spend holidays with friends, or make more of almost a family structure with your friends, your family of origin may turn around and say to you, oh, those friends, they're telling you that you're so great, right? And all that, because you just need to hear that. But that's because they want something from you. They're working an angle. Blood is thicker than water. Your real family will always have your back. And that will confuse you. Because after a lifetime of being abused and invalidated and gaslighted by this family system, you're still able to be confused by your family of origin. You may even buy the gaslighted nonsense your family is selling you, and then start having doubts about the motives of the lovely systems of friends in which you have immersed yourself, and then get sucked back into the toxic family system. Narcissistic family systems don't like to lose control. They don't like when you marry healthy people that help you foster boundaries. They don't like when you find friends who cheer you on and psychologically support you and encourage you. They don't like they don't even like it when you succeed. These family systems are often designed to keep people psychologically sort of imprisoned, to keep their sandbags on their balloons so they don't float away, always feeling not enough and off balance so they can keep controlling you. Now, given what I do for a living, I have actually always disliked this proverb because I think it really plays on guilt and misassumptions. And it gives a family carte blanche to behave badly and then fall back on a foolish proverb as a manipulation. We'll have your back more than other people do, even though we've never had your back, but you can't say that. The other challenging aspect of this proverb is that for many people, it fosters a sense of grief. One of the massive psychological tolls of a narcissistic family of origin is the sense that you did not get to have that very human and necessary experience of a safe childhood, or unconditional love, or a sense of connection, or having adults in your life who value your aspirations and celebrate you. There is grief at missing out on that very, very human experience, and a grief that really coalesces in adulthood at the impact and the realization of not having had that, what was missed, and a rumination about how different your life could have been if your early family relationships had been healthy. And as an adult, if you had healthy relationships with your parents and were free of all of the anxiety that growing up in a narcissistic family system can give you. The grief over your own limiting beliefs about yourself, the grief over not having that blood tie to a system that has your back instead of a system that manipulates you and can impact you every day. So when these kinds of statements are made, that blood is thicker than water, they double down on the grief and guilt and shame that so many people experience when they come from narcissistic family systems. Some people cope by creating healthy families of their own. Others cope by drawing together friends into what feels like the supportive and loving family they wanted. Others cope by creating other ventures and things in their life that have a social element. And that's not water. It's something far, far more healthy. It's authentic ties, and that may actually be thicker than blood. In my estimation, a healthy family system, your blood, would celebrate your friendships, your relationships, your successes at work, and your dreams, and would never fall back on a nonsensical proverb about blood and water, but instead always be a safe space for you to land and celebrate the good things in your life. So while it's lovely to believe that your family would always have your back, it's very painful when they don't. And it can really bring up isolation, grief, and shame. And perhaps families that really do work well don't need to make this distinction. So falling back on this proverb, any family that feels like you have to say blood is thicker than water may be protesting too much. Because if you have to say this out loud, the family probably doesn't work, because in a healthy family system, people know that that system is there for them and doesn't get threatened because people have wonderful friendships and marriages and succeed. But in families that are manipulative and controlling, falling back on easy proverbs like blood is thicker than water can often feel people stuck and controlled and never being able to access the unconditionally supportive spaces that they need to be able to succeed in their lives.
Well, today I'm going to talk about a proverb many of you have heard. It takes two to tango. So again, the whole impetus behind this proverb series is that these proverbs are sort of baked into our lives as sort of folk wisdom, and sometimes they're believed to be truisms. Now, some of these proverbs nail it. They understand narcissism really well. But the problem is that some of these proverbs are actually a bit enabling and almost dangerous. This is one of those proverbs that's more in the enabling place. So let's take this one apart. This proverb, it takes two to tango, originated in a song from 1952, and then it kind of just became an idiom. The meaning of this is that a tango, in order to dance a tango, it requires two people. But then it kind of got generalized to infer that in many things, even in bad things like arguments, it requires two people. And then it kind of goes a step further in how we interpret it. And now it means that certain things, like arguments or other disagreements, that somehow both people in the argument are equally responsible or culpable. It takes two to tango. And this is where this proverb, in my estimation, takes a bit of a tough turn when it comes to narcissistic relationships. And it is actually a proverb that is often leveled against people who are in these relationships. And this is a proverb that will often keep them stuck in these relationships. One of the most challenging patterns people who are experiencing narcissistic abuse endure is self-blame. People in narcissistic relationships blame themselves for everything that's going wrong in the relationship, and actually in a lot of other areas of their life. They blame themselves for not saying things right in the relationship. They believe the gaslighting. They end up gaslighting themselves. They blame themselves for not being empathic enough. They blame themselves for not understanding what the narcissistic person has gone through. And all of that self-blame can lead to lots of isolation and shame. Well, with zippy little proverbs like "it takes two to tango" thrown into the mix, many times the attitude people will take for people who are experiencing narcissistic abuse, especially in close relationships, is, hey, you're the one who chose this person. You're the one who stayed in this relationship. You're the one who's not getting out of it. It takes two to tango. Maybe it's about you too. So maybe this is partially your fault. And when a person who's in a narcissistic relationship hears this, too often they actually believe it and take it to heart, that maybe the narcissistic person's behavior is partly their responsibility, or that somehow they're contributing to it, or things they're doing it is what's bringing this behavior out. After all, it takes two to tango. The challenge is this: nobody is teaching anyone about narcissistic relationships back at an age when it would have been a little bit more useful for us to hear about it. Do you remember the day in school or life when you were taught, hey, there's some folks out there and they happen to be the most charming, charismatic, interesting folks you're going to meet? And they might even remind you in this really weird, mystical, mess up with your mind way of the invalidation you experienced in childhood. And then you're really intrigued, and then once you get into the relationship, they will manipulate you, and they really probably won't change no matter what you do, and they don't have any empathy, so they don't really care about you, and you will be stuck, and no one will get it, and they'll blame you for the mess you're in. Do you remember that day? Because I sure as hell don't remember anyone having that conversation with me. We are usually fed the typical Disney drivel and happily ever after enabling nonsense, but no one's ever really given the real skinny on what toxic relationships are really about. And then when you elevate this to the real world and other entities like courts and HR departments and policies and all the rest of these sort of institutions, when the time comes and you decide to dismantle one of these relationships, well, let me tell you, those institutions don't get it. And even if they did, there isn't much they can do about it. Family law, or frankly any law, does not account for narcissism. So basically, the system is telling you, hey, it takes two to tango. Suck it up. I have heard this over and over happen in court settings. People who are embroiled in impossible and difficult divorces with impossible and difficult narcissistic people. But as long as the narcissistic person's manipulation and cruelty and invalidation, and even at times sadistic and vindictive behavior either stays just on the right side of the law, or the judge or the mediator either doesn't get it or doesn't care, the attitude of the court is usually, it takes two to tango, and takes the stance that it isn't their problem to bring justice to your bad choice. They're just rather mechanically going to separate the assets and children equitably, and there is no formula to account for psychological harm, past or future. The two to tango model doesn't account for people not getting good information about narcissistic relationships. It's a big question, right? If everyone knew about this at a younger age, would we have all made the same mistakes? I think a lot of us would have. But maybe we would have popped out earlier, right? But after a person gets fully educated about narcissism and narcissistic relationships, gets the straight talk and real information, and they decide to stay, and many people do, I do tell them, if you decide to stay, this is on you. If you're going to sit here and wait for them to change, then you need to take responsibility for that, because they're not going to. So that's a faulty premise. However, if you're going to sit here, stay in this relationship, recognize it's not going to change, but maybe you're staying for strategic reasons, waiting for children to turn 18, sorting out finances, or if it's a workplace situation, waiting to get vested in a job to get fuller benefits upon departure. So in other words, you're no longer tangoing. That's fine. Lots of people do that. It's when you keep tangoing after you get the information about narcissism, well, that might require you doing a deeper dive in therapy to keep unbraiding those trauma bonds. You won't be the exception. I won't be the exception. None of us is going to be the exception. These patterns are really not amenable to change, and they rarely change in a relationship if somebody doesn't leave, right? But many people, after they get the information, they actually do step away. Either they leave the relationship, or they go no contact, or they actually don't leave it literally, but they just gray rock and they firewall the hell out of it. Even then, it means they're no longer tangoing. Most people keep in the tango because they don't get it. But once most people get it, they do stop tangoing. But since the world will often blame or use the two to tango proverb, lots of people get caught in a thought loop of feeling that they are somehow responsible for the relationship and its harms and its abuses, and they keep trying to make it better. Thus, it turns them into sort of relational Sisyphuses, and they're forever living this never-ending cycle of invalidation and dismissiveness and gaslighting. I understand why people take the two to tango stand in normal, healthy, non-antagonistic relationships. The two to tango trope actually can hold some water in those cases. If we're in a healthy relationship, we do need to take some responsibility, awareness, and self-reflection for our contribution in any dyadic interaction. And then all we can do is keep our side of the street clean. But when you are being gaslighted and you don't know what that is, you aren't dancing the same dance as the other person. It takes two to tango is a riff on the he said, she said, he said, he said, she said, she said, they said trope of who knows what the real truth is. After all, it takes two to tango. If someone has more power, if someone is manipulative, if someone is a gaslighter, if someone has very little empathy, if someone has no ability to reflect on how their behavior affects someone else, this is not about a two to tango. This is not a dance. It's a manipulation. I always say that all bets are off until a person truly understands the personality structure of the other person with whom they're relating. Until then, throw away proverbs that put disproportionate responsibility on people who are being harmed. Those proverbs just do more harm and can often keep people stuck in these relationships for a very long time for reasons of guilt and shame. And while you heal, please, you might want to give up the tango and perhaps learn a dance. You can dance by yourself.
So absence makes the heart grow fonder. Now, listen. This is one that we've all heard. Like this is sort of one of those proverbs that everyone's familiar with, and it exists in every language. Now, absence makes the heart grow fonder in some ways is a rationalization, right? It's the ultimate rationalization with somehow trying to get okay with a loved one, especially when like sort of your intimate partner goes away, maybe for a short time on a business trip, or maybe has to move away for a longer period of time, or goes away to school, or goes in the military and gets deployed, or is in a long distance relationship. Interestingly, this phrase has its origins, it's quite old, has its origins with an ancient Roman poet who used a similar line in a book. And other sources, though, have said maybe it's not the Roman poet. It might actually be a modern phrase that started being used by English writers in the 19th century. So it's been around a while. Whether it's been around for thousands or hundreds of years, that part wasn't clear. But what does it mean? The idea that if someone is away, we may appreciate them. And maybe it reflects on the daily taking for granted that characterizes any relationship. that idea that when we're away from someone and we don't get to have them every single day, that absence reminds us of the importance they have, of who they are in our day-to-day lives, and I should say, that our lives are better when they come back and they're back in our lives. It really boils down to us maybe almost valuing something when we can't access it easily and it's far away, that under those circumstances, we would appreciate a person more. So now, how does all that relate to narcissistic relationships? It actually maps on to that push-pull approach avoidance that many people experience in narcissistic relationships. That kind of push and pull cycle of the narcissistic relationship is a really, really bad cycle that many narcissistic relationships can fall into. And it's interesting because you'll have a narcissistic relationship, and we're all familiar with the cycle, right? The love bombing phase. And then as the relationship settles in, and it's clear that, okay, love bombing, ooh, this was great. All right, yeah, they're the real thing. And you relax and you're not going anywhere and you're like, this is it. The narcissist almost immediately will start taking you for granted. The devaluation phase. During that devaluation phase, many people will report that they started feeling panicky in their relationship. They're like, I want the love bombing back. Like when they were love bombing, they were sending me texts all the time. They were always in touch with me. They idealized me. They talked about our magical connection. The sex was hot. It was fun. They gave me so much attention. Like, I like that better. People, though, who are caught in the devaluation cycle might start detecting that if they pull away from the narcissist, that they aren't too fawning over the narcissist, something happens. Because narcissists don't like abandonment, and they like to be in control of the relationship. So if you start pulling back, that, for some narcissistic relationships, sort of starts a little bit of a lighter love bombing sequence. Again, the narcissist gets attention. So but it really is not fun to play hard to get in a relationship for years. Because really all you want is to just settle into the simple sequences of a loving relationship. It's exhausting to play hard to get day after day, year after year. You play hard to get, and then you're in, and then you relax. And that's where this saying, this proverb, absence makes the heart grow fonder, takes on kind of a pathological twist in a narcissistic relationship. As long as you're around and you're available and you're responsive, in many ways, the narcissist actually isn't always that interested. But when you pull away, in essence, you sort of make yourself a little bit more absent, it's as though their heart does become a little fonder, and they come back in, and that whole cycle starts again. This approach avoidance cycle of the narcissistic relationship isn't necessarily the heart growing fonder. Let's not give it that much credit. Rather, it's the narcissist probably wanting to maintain control in the relationship and avoid abandonment, which actually is an issue for people who have narcissistic personality styles. And that's not nearly as poetic, and probably not what that poor Roman poet meant. Now, in this cycle of love bombing, devaluing, ooh, if I pull away, they may come back. This cycle means that people find that narcissistic relationships are characterized too much by game playing. This idea of like, if I pull back a little and don't answer their text and I mess with them a little and I delay, like I'm going to delay 2 hours before I respond to the text message, and I'm not going to call them right back even though I'm right here on my phone, I'm not going to answer it. Sort of feigning disinterest to get them hooked back in. These cycles are toxic, and let's face it, they're not really sustainable. Now, why do the narcissists seemingly become sort of fonder when you try to become, or you become, absent. Maybe even if you go on a trip, or business trip, or family trip, or just a trip. Remember, narcissistic relationships are characterized by game playing. And game playing in the long term in a relationship is not healthy. For people who have narcissistic personality styles, relationships serve sort of what we'd call a regulatory function. And by that I mean people with narcissistic personality styles, they use other people to get validation, to get admiration, to get narcissistic supply, to give them something to control. It's a complicated space because even though other people are a source of supply, people are also a source of threat for people who have narcissistic personalities. People can be a source of criticism. People can potentially abandon them. People have the ability to sort of spend enough time with them and point out or see their deficits, which evokes shame. Other people make demands, which the narcissists, as far as the narcissist is concerned, other people can ask things of them, and that's inconvenient, right? The lack of empathy means if you ask something of a narcissistic person, I'm like, this is inconvenient. I don't want to do this right now. And other people might have expectations of the narcissistic individual, which is also quite exhausting. For people of narcissistic personality styles, they want relationships to be one-way streets that benefit them, with the other person in the relationship expecting nothing, and then the narcissist getting their needs met, and then they're good. And it's interesting, it's for this reason why people who have narcissistic personality styles actually struggle with parenting. Parenting and being a parent is really about much more giving, not really getting. And the narcissistic parent, in a way, does expect the child to give to them. And so the narcissistic parent will only give to the child what the narcissistic parent wants to give to the child to get what they need and back. Like, for example, I'm going to spend time with narcissistic parents because I'm going to spend time with you, and then on becoming a great basketball player, and that's our time together because that's what the parents want. These relationships in general for narcissists are sort of a damned if you do and damned if you don't. Narcissistic individuals really do need the narcissistic supply to regulate, but they don't want to do the work. It's kind of like money for most of us, right? We want it, but we get burned out working for it, and very few of us are lucky to just get it, right? So relationships, though, aren't money. They're very different. They involve people, and they're supposed to be respectful, mutual, reciprocal, kind, compassionate, and supportive. That stuff, not that important for somebody with a narcissistic personality style. So if you find that the narcissistic person in your life seems more interested in you right before you seem like you're about to step away, or when you're pulling away, or maybe when the sort of the dance of sort of texting and all of that is a bit more sort of gamey, and then when they first pull you back in, they're interested again, that's a thing. They're often far more intrigued by the thing they can't have rather than the thing that's right in front of them. For healthy people, yes, absence does make the heart fonder. But it's also a wake-up call. That saying, absence makes the heart grow fonder. It's a wake-up call to take good care of people and be good to them when they're right in front of you, instead of just learning that you miss them when they're far away. Recognize they're important when they're right there, standing right there in front of you. In narcissistic relationships, absence doesn't make the heart fonder. I think it just moves the narcissistic supply far away and makes the narcissistic person work harder to try and get it back. Don't confuse the controlling dynamics of a toxic relationship with the far more well-intended gratitude that was probably what was originally intended by this tried and true proverb and phrase. So those of you who've had the real sense that absence made your heart grow fonder, that's wonderful, because it really can. And it's also a wake-up call. Like, I've got to appreciate this person when they're with me. But for those who were caught in a narcissistic relationship, and it seemed like they were so much more interested in me when I wasn't right in front of them, that really goes down to the gamesmanship that characterizes most narcissistic relationships. Good things come to those who wait. Now, this proverb, which sits alongside the equally annoying proverb of patience is a virtue, ranks up there as one of the most enabling proverbs. Although it has a sort of biblical feel, its origins are in fact more contemporary, and originally it was written as all things come to those who wait in a poem by someone named Lady Mary Montgomery Curry. So when it comes to narcissism, you know where this is going. Think of all of the bad advice you have ever received. Just be patient. This is just your partner's stress. People say things that they don't always mean. In time, your relationship will work out. And 5 or 10 or 50 years later, you're still waiting. This proverb is very enabling. It supports a sort of passivity and misguided belief that if you're patient enough, everything's going to work out. It's a bad assumption because what it does is that it lets narcissistic people off the hook for a while, the very essence of enabling. And the person who is suffering or struggling in the narcissistic relationship can just be put on ice for a while and nobody has to deal with their pain. Good things come to those who wait also plays upon the future faking of it all. The proverb itself is actually a bit of a future faking proverb. It gets muddled into the hope of the narcissistic relationship, the hope that has too much to do with narcissistic relationships. If I wait, then maybe my partner will change. Maybe my partner will someday see all of the wonderful things that I am. Maybe my partner will want to spend more time with me. Maybe my mother will finally notice me. Maybe my father will finally stop criticizing me. Maybe my siblings will want to stop competing with me. Maybe my boss will give me more credit someday. Good things will come. Will this happen with a narcissist? No. No, they will not. What will come, and I can promise you that, is more rage, plenty of invalidation, lots of gaslighting, manipulation, more future faking, and lots of empty promises. If you buy into this proverb of good things come to those who wait, and you're in a narcissistic relationship, I can promise you that one thing that will definitely come is regret. I'm going to be honest, I remember personally, I was once in a job where it was just abusive and unreasonable and inequitable. It was just a mess. And there was all kinds of gaslighting and manipulation and BS. Awful. And I remember struggling in this job and asking more senior people in this career and them telling me, just be patient. It's a great job. And the people you work with are big names. Now, all of this happened, I was quite a bit younger. It was before I started studying narcissism, but it just didn't feel right. I ended up staying much longer than I should have because people kept telling me good things will come if I just wait. I ended up having to leave. It was making me sick. I took a less fancy job with less fancy people. Interestingly, I know people who stayed in that other job. They're still waiting for the good things to happen. People who are in narcissistic relationships are frustrated. And frankly, these relationships are frustrating to everyone else. Even if other people don't admit it, they can see when any relationship, including yours, is toxic in most cases. But there isn't a lot that other people can do. And people also don't feel like they can tell you, if you're their friend, that they think your partner is toxic because they may be afraid of losing you as a friend. Families may value family loyalty over protecting people within the family from the family toxicity. So proverbs like good things come to those who wait, they tend to keep people stuck in a narcissistic relationship. It tends to keep those people in a helpless position because frankly, everyone around that relationship feels helpless too. Maybe you're able to get out of the narcissistic relationship. Maybe you're not able. Maybe you can set boundaries or gray rock. But no matter where you are at, you don't have to wait. Good things can come because you can make them come. Even a garden, yes, you plant the seed and you wait, but every day you are weeding and watering and taking care of it. In your life, stop waiting on the narcissist. In your life, good things will come if you just don't take the passive role of waiting on them, but instead focus on the healthy people in your life, the meaningful interests you have, and stop waiting for good things to come from the wrong source. So here's my revision on this proverb. Good things come to those who are patient with themselves and stop waiting for toxic people to come around. And instead of taking our wisdom from a turn of the century poem, let's keep it real. Let's stop waiting for buses that will never come, waiting for good things that are supposed to come, and take our lives back. A lot of the guidance, the bad guidance people get about narcissistic relationships is be patient. It might just get better. And then even therapists will future fake you, friends will future fake you, family will future fake you. Give it a minute. If it doesn't feel good, take a good, long, hard look at it and start having some important conversations with yourself, and stop blaming yourself and falling into this nonsense that patience is a virtue. Or as Oscar Wilde said it, patience is the most overrated virtue. Thanks again. But let's take on today's proverb. It is, every cloud has a silver lining. This is something that's in song, you name it. So I'm sure you've heard this one. Interestingly, I started thinking about this video on a rainy day, and I happen to love rainy days, but that was when it came and I was looking at the gray clouds. But when our lives are full or fill up with proverbial clouds, for example, narcissistic relationships, we all sort of hope that there is a reason, there's something good might come out of the suffering and confusion of the narcissistic relationship. The traditional meaning of this proverb is that every dreary or difficult thing in our lives has a potentially positive element to it. It's one of those lines, one of those proverbs that's supposed to get us through the tough times, right? Every cloud has a silver lining. It's going to be fine. It's sort of interesting. This phrase has its origins back in the writer John Milton, in a poem he wrote in 1634 with the line, "Did a sable cloud turn forth her silver lining on the night?" This line has since been modified by various authors and now turned into its current form of every cloud has a silver lining. Well, I'm going to be honest with you, not all these proverbs are good, and this proverb has both dangerous and useful elements in our understanding of narcissistic relationships. So let's start with the dangerous parts, and let's just get the dangerous stuff out of the way and work our way to the silver lining, I guess. Proverbs like this one, that every cloud has a silver lining, can often end up becoming part of the arsenal of justifying and rationalizing these kinds of relationships and the positive nonsense that keeps people stuck in these relationships. The cloud, which is the toxic relationship, is believed to possibly have a silver lining. So a person in a toxic relationship justifies the bad stuff, hoping for the good stuff, the so-called silver lining. And silver linings can be everything, from focusing on the one good day you had in that relationship to perhaps the financial freedoms that come with being in a relationship with a narcissistic person. You might say something like, they're an absolutely terrible person, but we do take some great vacations. And unfortunately, these silver lining binding patterns can keep people stuck for longer. The longer you mine these silver linings, the worse it is. And the longer a person is stuck in one of these relationships, you already know, the worse that it is for your health. Proverbs like this whole silver lining one are often held up and given out by those positivity folks who love telling people to look for the positive and share gratitude and intention your way to happiness and all that stuff, right? All of that, quite lovely. Great. But I cannot get behind it if it invalidates the experience of the person in a narcissistic relationship. Too often, when a person finds themselves in a toxic relationship, and for example, they might go in for therapy or coaching or some kind of guidance, too often I have heard that they're given silly feedback like, well, why don't we talk about some of the positive things in this relationship? And I literally either want to scream or cry when I hear this, because I want to tell the person telling them to look for that silver lining positive stuff. Trust me, this person has spent a lot of time doing their best to over-focus on the so-called positive things in a quest to minimize their psychological horror at the abuse that's happening to them. So when people are told to find these silver linings, it plays against the cognitive dissonance that keeps them stuck and stokes the fires of the justifications that keep them really stuck. So you tell them to look for that silver lining, and it also, you get this person who also ends up blaming themselves. They think, oh, maybe I'm not finding enough silver linings. But you are wondering, is there a good side of this proverb for survivors? I actually think yes, there is. When we think about the work of existential writers, especially people like Viktor Frankl or Rollo May or people like Edith Eger, they are saying in the most eloquent way that suffering can be mined for meaning and purpose, that we can be present with our suffering and learn from it, not hang out in it or want more of it or seek it out, but rather to attempt to embark on a journey of post-traumatic meaning, purpose, and growth. So many survivors of narcissistic abuse are worried that after they get the divorce or they leave the narcissistic relationship or set the boundaries with family members, friends, partners, whatever, that they will forever be harmed, mired in grief, unable to trust, and permanently cynical. What I am actually observing in myriad survivors over time is that most people actually get to that place of growth, to a place of less fear, of finding meaning and purpose in what happened to them, of finding joys in small moments and not having those joys stolen by someone else's bitterness, and not finding joys in justifying another person's bad behavior, but in the beauty around them. But all of that means making a shift. It doesn't mean getting out of the relationship necessarily. I know some of you can't. It doesn't even necessarily mean going no contact. But it means recognizing these toxic relationships for what they are. Setting real boundaries. Yeah, maybe going no contact, maybe getting out, at least gray rocking, but at a minimum, at least eradicating the false hope. At that point, once you are no longer in the haze of as much confusion, you start to see what you have learned from being in this relationship or these relationships. Perhaps you've learned a certain mental toughness that you didn't have before, or have dug into a deeper patience, a deeper empathy, a far greater appreciation for good friendships, a better ability in terms of cultivating your own solitude, an appreciation for small moments. Even if the small moment is simply like, wow, I just got through the whole evening and no one criticized me. You have the ability to be present and less ruminative. To me, the silver lining is what comes after the narcissistic relationship. So don't try to waste your time trying to find silver linings while you're in the relationship, because that's going to keep you stuck. But do the work, understand the relationship, figure out your path forward, and once you do, then you can go looking for that silver lining. Not in that toxic relationship, but in yourself. So next time you go out on that rainy day or that cloudy day, look up, think about those silver linings, but stop trying to find them in other people and instead look for them here. Ignorance is bliss. Now, we've all heard this proverb. It's a very common one. And in its simplest terms, it's a riff on the comfort that comes from not knowing something. This proverb can go in so many directions. Ignorance is bliss because you don't have to think about something if you don't even know it, right? So it's not taking up any mental real estate. And you don't have to worry if you don't even know it's an issue. This proverb, ignorance is bliss, has been used for everything, to people not knowing that they have a health condition, to the idea that that their partner may be cheating, to not knowing that a pandemic is coming, right? Think of where most of us were mentally in the February of 2020, right? Ignorance is bliss. We had no idea what was coming. The lightheartedness of ignorance is almost childlike. You don't have to worry about stuff and your mind is lighter. So it's kind of blissful to not have to worry about heavy stuff. Now, interestingly, the origin of this proverb is a Thomas Gray poem from the late 1700s, and the line goes like this: "Where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise." His riff on this was a bit more granular. He believed that if we fret about things that we cannot overthink or control, like our fates or the future, then that kind of stuff isn't worth worrying about. It's nothing we can do. But most people only know the ignorance is bliss part and will cover their ears and say, la, 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 I don't need to know that. I don't need to know that. Just let me stay in my blissed out space of denial, right? That's pretty blissed out because you don't have to worry about things. Now, some of you, I bet, are already connecting this to narcissism and narcissistic relationships. This is where it gets complicated. At one level, lots of people will say, I didn't really know or understand the word narcissism way back when I initially met my partner, or I didn't even have a name for what happened in my family of origin. I just assumed it was sort of, all families maybe were a little bit messed up. I didn't know it was a thing. So in that case, ignorance wasn't bliss. It was confusing as hell. And once you started understanding the overlay of what narcissism is and how it plays out in human relationships, you felt better able to function in the world. In some cases, illuminating the ignorance is uncomfortable. Recognizing that these personality styles really do not change, and this is it, can feel sad and raise emotions such as grief, but at least it's less confusing. Now, a major dynamic in narcissistic relationships on sort of both sides, both narcissists and people experiencing narcissistic abuse, is denial. The person experiencing narcissistic abuse may take the stance of, this isn't that bad, or, oh, come on now, or all relationships are difficult. The narcissistic person will behave badly, and then behave normally, and then behave badly, and the narcissist lives their lives in denial or disregard of the impact of their behavior on other people. Is that ignorance? I'm not sure, and it sure as hell isn't bliss. But narcissistic relationships are really kept in place by something I call unseeingness. The narcissistic person will never see their own behavior, and until you fully get it or feel brave enough to fully get it, neither will the other person in the relationship. Now, I have had more than a few clients over the years come into therapy and feel that their relationship, whatever relationship it was getting more and more toxic or suffocating or confusing. I work with them, we get into all of what's happening, and they're clear. They become clear, I see this narcissism thing. And then they're upset and say, I wish I never came in to see you, Dr. Ramani. In some ways, ignorance was bliss. I knew my relationship wasn't great, but I had some hope that maybe it was going to get better. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't want to disrupt my life. I don't want to get divorced. So they get mad that I popped that balloon, and they drop out of therapy. I don't know, maybe they go back into full-blown denial and find their way through. There is no one right way, but I kind of took away their bliss by pushing out that ignorance. Now, ignorance is bliss can obviously be elevated to a larger societal level in a way that really does have implications for narcissism. I cannot tell you how many people, my friends, my acquaintances, people in my family, people who I don't work with clinically, these are, again, social people, tell me, what is this narcissism thing you do for a living, Ramani? We've never heard of it. At those times, I get a little sad and frustrated at those issues, because at one level, I'm actually really happy for these people. They're close to me, and I'm like, wow, people in that rarefied group of being somewhat cordoned off from toxic people and toxic messes, and or maybe the difficult people that they have to deal with aren't that impactful or hurtful. Or maybe these people I know are actually in massive denial, because I know for a fact they've had some tough people in their lives. But that makes me think larger. If people remain in ignorance about these patterns, what do? They enable these patterns. They write folks off who are really narcissistic, but they write them off as just being intense, misunderstood. Ah, they're just a handful. That's how they are. Oh, don't be so rough on him. He had a tough father. Oh, don't let her get to you. She's not that bad. Oh, that person, they've been through some stuff. And we do this over and over again. Then, at the same time, after enabling it, we normalize this behavior in public people, world leaders and CEOs, and other civic leaders and celebrities and other people with big public profiles. And we think, oh, that big old personality of theirs, yeah, maybe that kind of, that honest talk, that's how you get ahead. When we are ignorant, we enable this stuff. And then we are more likely to find ourselves get deeper and deeper in with people with these personality styles. And that's never good for any of us. Thomas Gray's original take on this, when he said, "'Tis folly to be wise," is actually useful for understanding anxiety. Basically, he's saying, don't sweat the stuff you can't do anything about. But when it comes to narcissism, I would argue that ignorance is not only not bliss, it could potentially be dangerous. So, unfortunately for many of you watching this channel, the jig is up, the genie's out of the bottle, and you can't unsee what's happened to you. I know many people say, I wish I could have gone back to this world that I once lived in where I thought people were good. Yeah, I agree. Not having to worry about toxic, difficult stuff really is blissful, but also not knowing the dangers that lurk is downright dangerous. Thanks again.